So welcome everyone to the Radiant Torah. This week we are going to be discussing and learning some of the deeper psychospiritual elements and insights into this Torah with commentary by Rebbe Nachman and others. And we want to dedicate today's class to everyone who needs to be safe, which is all of us. So we should all be safe. Hashem should protect us, and he should certainly lead us to Eretz Yisrael, and without any of the impediments of the spies, the Meraglim, that we're going to learn about in this parsha. So Parsha Shelach. Oh, and I want to also thank Dr. Eleanor Godis for sponsoring this series. Parsha Shelach begins, Shelach lecha anashim v'yasuru es eretz Canaan, asher ani nosein livnei Yisrael, ish echad, lemate avosav tishlachu kol nasi vahem. So it begins with Hashem speaking, saying, send for yourself men who will explore. Vayisuru is like to tour, okay, to visit and explore the land of Canaan that I am going to be giving to the Jewish people. And send one man from each tribe, every man a nasi, every man a prince, a leader of the tribe. So what we learn in this parsha is that Moshe sends, sorry, I lost my notes. Moshe sends 12 spies to Canaan. The children of Israel knew that they were supposed to be headed to the land, to inherit the land, and that Hashem was going to send it to them. And they sent, I'm actually going to ask, hold on one second. There was another person needed to be muted or videoed or whatever. Okay, never mind. They did it. So Moshe sends these 12 spies to the land following Hashem's order. Now, Hashem says, send for yourself, do it for you. Why? So Rashi explains that Hashem said this because the Jews themselves asked if they could see the land first, okay? They didn't want to just go there and show up. They wanted to test it out. They wanted to know what lay ahead. And this was the first big mistake of the parsha and of what we're going to learn in this parsha. So as an overview, Moshe sends out the 12 spies to the land. And the spies were blemished, so to speak. They had a corruption, which we're going to learn about. But eventually, after 40 days of touring the land and all the events that occurred there and all the sights they saw, they returned. And they brought back some giant fruits, and they began to report on the land. And initially, they made their report very positive. And in the end, they ended up taking that positivity and twisting it around, making a negative report about Eretz Yisrael, about the Holy Land that Hashem was giving the Jewish people, our ancestors. So this was a problem. Only Yehoshua ben Nun and Kalev, who was the prince of the tribe of Yehuda, gave positive reports. We'll speak about them later. So the people start to complain. They say they'd rather return to Mitzrayim. And as a correction for all these missteps, Hashem delays the entry into the land. And that's when the Jews began officially to have to wander for 40 years in the desert, okay, in the Midbar. because that generation had to die out. So the good news is only the men had to die out, the men between the ages of 20 and 60. The women, we were not culpable. Why? Because we had more emunah than the men. We didn't necessarily need or want the spies to go check out the land first. So meanwhile, after that, a few other things happen, and then we get some laws. We get the laws of some offerings, some nesachim, and we also get the laws of Challah. We get the laws of tzitzis, and so on. So today we're going to talk about the incident of the spies as well as the laws of Khala. We can't cover everything in the parsha, obviously. It's a big parsha. They all are so packed. So Hashem sent the spies to the land at their request, okay? What really was the problem with this? Why was this an issue? Okay, so Hashem was giving us the Holy Land. And the Holy Land, whoever is not muted, please mute yourselves. Okay, thank you. So Charlene, when people come in, can you mute them right away? Thank you. So why was this an issue? Because in order to reach Eretz Yisrael, the Holy Land, the land where Hashem is totally in charge, you have to have emunah. Now, what do I mean by this? We see people all the time making aliyah, moving to Israel. So the level of emunah that you need is dependent on who you are, okay? So it doesn't really matter what your neighbor needed to get to Israel or what your friend needs to get to Israel. It matters what level of emunah you need to get to Israel. And whether we are speaking about making aliyah literally, or whether we are speaking about meriting to reach the level of spiritual development that is the concept of Eretz Yisrael, okay, which we were not going to go into here. It's quite deep, it's quite detailed, but it is something that Rebbe Nachman speaks about, although he does also say literally the land of Israel is something people need to reach. So the idea is you have to know yourself. You have to know yourself. You have to know your relationship with Hashem. What level of emunah do you need? So someone who is at we spoke about that chain last week, someone who's a rung ahead of you on the chain will need more emunah than someone who is on a lower level of that chain, okay? It really is, excuse me, I'm just going to let someone in. I'm going to mute them, okay? Sorry about that. Okay, so the idea is that really it's dependent on each person. If we are going to compare ourselves to the next person, we will not reach what we need to reach. So you'll see that there's some people who get there right away. Don't worry about them. Okay, the same can be said again of that level of spiritual development that is the same concept of the level of Eretz Yisrael, which of course is a higher, whatever level you're at, whatever level I'm at, it's a higher level for sure. It really is all relative. There's one truth, but the levels we need to reach to attain that truth are indeed relative to each individual. Okay, so why did the Bnei Yisrael want to actually send the spies? So the reason is they had some doubts. Now, there are other interpretations of this and beautiful interpretations of this. We are just going to focus on a couple of the reasons today. The first is that they weren't convinced that the land was good enough to go and fight the war that they knew they had to fight to attain it. This is shocking. Why is this shocking? Because the meraglim, the spies, were actually tzaddikim. They were the princes. Okay, each one was a nasi of his tribe, a head of his tribe. And they really were at a very high level. Yet the Midrash tells us they still had flaws in their faith and trust in Hashem. The next reason is that they felt that they needed the exact details of what lay ahead. They wanted to know everything in advance. They wanted to plan everything. If you are a planner and you are trying to plan in every detail a spiritual mission, know that there's going to be a spanner in the works at one point or another. Truly. With spiritual missions, very often you will see there's a lot of the fly by the seat of your pants kind of happenings that occur. Anybody tries to plan a vacation to the Caribbean or Europe or wherever, probably will go pretty well. Okay, there'll be some mishaps, but they'll get the hotel. There won't be a problem with the booking. They'll get the meals they ordered and so on and so forth for the most part. If you try to plan a trip to Kivrei Tzadikim, the grave sites of Tzadikim, whether it is in Eretz Yisrael or whether it's in Ukraine or Russia or wherever it is, whether it's in upstate New York, okay, or well, not upstate, but Queens, wherever, you will find that those trips will not go as smoothly. They just won't, because obstacles arise based on the one, holiness of your endeavor, the spiritual benefits of your endeavor, okay, and two, based on how much personal yearning and desire you need in order to get to that next level. Because every spiritual endeavor is a step up, just like why is going to Israel called Aliyah? You're making Aliyah. You're making a step up. You're going up. Okay. So the lack of emunah of the meraglim, there are other issues too, we can't cover them all, was really the seed of the entire generations being prevented from going up to the land. Okay, the people in the generation we spoke out before. What do we take from this personally? So what we take from this personally is this idea of knowing that we cannot plan for every eventuality, more and more specifically when we're trying to achieve something spiritual. And you'll see this. You'll see, let's say people are planning a Shabbaton or something like this. You will see all the obstacles and breakdowns in the communication and in the setup. That's a good sign. It's a very good sign. If it takes a long time to happen and there's a little bit, or at least a little bit of chaos, no, that's because everybody's going to be taking a step up spiritually. It's a spiritual endeavor. Remember that in your own life. You can apply it to Shabbos, okay? Erev Shabbat, what happens? We know the house is thrown into chaos. If you enter Shabbos smoothly, good for you, not knocking it, okay? It's great to plan ahead, but the typical situation is, especially with young children at home, is a lot of chaos. No, that's because you're about to go up a level. It's a good sign. It's not a bad sign, okay? We want to try to enter Shabbos with Yishuv Hadas, with calm and peaceful mind, but that's not always the case. Okay, so what else was the problem with the spies wanting to go to the land ahead of time? What was the problem with them scouting it out? So let me just find my notes. Okay, So this was considered a rejection, says Reb Noson, of hashgacha pratis. What is hashgacha pratis? Hashgacha pratit. This is the supervision, hashgacha, of every single element of a person's life. We think, oh, we got that parking spot just when we needed to be at that wedding or be there for that birth or something important. Thank you, Hashem, for the divine providence. But hashgacha pratis is all the time, constantly, constantly, constantly Hashem's supervision. And we have to learn how to feel it. We have to learn to acquire the taste for it. As a matter of fact, Rebbe Nachman says you should look for it. Excuse me, one moment. We should actually look every moment in our lives and see what we can see with the parts coming together. It doesn't mean we have to engage in magical thinking. It doesn't mean that we have to see connections where none exists, but we should be open to feeling Hashem's constant involvement in our life. And the more we're open to it, the more we feel it. Why? Because, as you probably all know, Rebbe Nachman's famous teaching, our thoughts create our reality. And when we think about Hashem's love for us and his supervision of us, and we yearn to learn more about that, even if we're not feeling it, and especially if we're not feeling it, but we yearn for it and we talk to Hashem about it and we read things that give us the insights to be able to see these connections, lo and behold, we're going to start to experience more and more and more of them. And it comes to a point that we don't have to be like the spies in this regard. And we don't have to be like the Jewish people in this regard. They were tzaddikim. They were at a very high level. Yet, they didn't fully appreciate that Hashem was with them every step of the way. One of the marvels, the most marvels in a negative way, in a shocking way, in an instructive way, for us in Bamidbar, in this whole book of the Torah, is how can the Jews have left from Egypt? How can they have received the Torah and still they doubt Hashem's intimate involvement in their lives? How is this possible? So this is what we can glean from this message. What happens is that Reb Noson tells us that when a person rejects this divine providence, which he likens to Hashem's continually watching us, we blemish our own vision, our own sight. And what happens is that our sight is blemished with tears. This causes us to feel unsafe, disconnected. And later on, as in this class, in the parsha, we're going to learn that when the spies gave their report and the Jews accepted the negative end of the report, that night was Tisha B'Av, the greatest day of mourning that we have, even before the temple was destroyed, okay? They were already mourning and crying because they felt Hashem wasn't with them. This again is instructive to each of us. Look around, look for the good, not just in other people, but in the situation. See Hashem's hashgacha even in the darkest situation. Look for it. It's not always easy. Sometimes it's really difficult. But if we look for it, our vision is expanded, our eyes open up, and we're able to see further, so to speak, okay, into our futures, into our lives, into the goodness in our lives. We're able to see further in that we're able to really develop the sight that is able to connect with this idea of Olam Haba, the world to come, the Geula, the redemption, and the coming of Mashiach. We will be able to connect with that more because our vision will be more expanded. The spies have just so much to teach us. Now, one of the things that Reb Noson says, and it's an important theme of Rebbe Nachman's too, is that when we are crying, because after all, we're human and we cry. And we cry when we have a loss, and we cry in grief, and we cry when things don't go the way that we truly believe is for the best. We just can't understand why we have to suffer. When we take those tears and don't waste them, and we remember as we're crying the ultimate thing to cry about, the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, the Beis Hamikdash, where Hashem had a dwelling place on earth, where we were able to truly live and fulfill our missions and our connection to him with joy. When we align our tears, when we join our tears to that thought, even if it's momentary, whatever you're crying about, whatever you're lamenting, remember Yerushalayim. Remember that we're still not really there yet. Okay, it's still, yes, it's inhabited by people and governments and the terrorists. We won't talk about them, and the good people, but we're still not there living our fulfilled life. Hang on to that memory, keep it in mind, and what will happen is you will elevate and correct your tears of sorrow. Okay, you're going to take the negativity out of them in a way. You're going to correct them. It's a tikkun for your sobbing and your crying. Okay. So the other issue with the spies, and the reason, and this connects with the hashgacha process that I was speaking about, is that they wanted an intermediary. The people wanted an intermediary between them and Hashem. Okay, the spies kind of acted as an intermediary, therefore forgetting that each of us can connect to Hashem directly. Yes, we need the tzaddikim for sure, but we don't necessarily need a go-between to manage every aspect of our lives. Our connection to Hashem is direct. You want to know how direct? Go to a quiet place and go talk to him for an hour a day if you can, 20 minutes, 5 minutes. Go talk to him and you're going to feel that love reflected back to you. And little by little, that relationship, just you and Hashem, just that yichud, that unity between the two of you is going to develop. And you'll see that you don't really need an intermediary. You don't need always a special segula and a special trick and a special that. Make some time for you and Hashem together each day. Okay. So I mentioned at the beginning that Hashem said, send spies for yourself, because he was simply agreeing to the request. So we know that Hashem does agree to the requests of the tzaddikim, and they wanted a lower level, really. But this is what they wanted, so he gave it to them. So hold on 1 second. So Hashem knew that this wasn't going to turn out so well. He already knew, they say, it was going to sour. It was going to be bitter. It was going to be an unhappy situation. Yet he let them go. Why? Because a person is led on the path that he or she wishes to go along. If you're yearning for good, you want the path of good, Hashem will lead you on that path. If you're learning for a lesser presence, God forbid, of Hashem in your life, you want more intermediaries, you'll have that. If you're learning for the worse, you'll have that too. Wherever you want to head, Hashem is going to open the doors for you. You'll see. So we all want to be focused on the good. We all want to be focused with emunah and bitachon, with faith and trust. Okay. So another reason why he didn't forbid them. There's some logical reasons that the Midrash tells us. So first of all, if he refused their request, they might assume that the land wasn't really as good as he promised it would be. And so this Chilul Hashem, this desecration of Hashem's name, of them believing that Hashem was misleading them, God forbid. So he said, okay, see for yourselves, it really is good. And then the underlying reason for all of this is linked back to this idea of going along the path which you want to be led on. And that is we each have bechira. We each have free will. We each do. And there could be discussions about how much free will we have and how can we have free will if Hashem knows what's going to happen. Rebbe Nachman says, don't worry about that. Don't worry about that paradox. Rely on the fact that you have the power to make a choice. Okay, Rebbe Nachman was perhaps the original motivational teacher of empowerment, self-empowerment. You have a choice. You get to choose. And in the moment, it might seem you don't really have a choice because you're used to responding habitually to events and things one way, but ultimately we have a choice. And so Hashem gives us our free choice. Okay, so important. It's something we talk about over and over again. Each of us thinks, I only have free choice when I'm making this big decision. But no, we make a million decisions a day, small ones, big ones, minuscule ones. Each one is a choice. Okay. See, free will. That's an important. Okay. So now I want to talk about the spies themselves, the meraglim themselves. So all the meraglim were problematical except for two. Yehoshua, who was Moshe's successor, Yehoshua ben Nun, and Kalev, okay? Who was Kalev? So Kalev was very special. Kalev was a prince of the tribe of Yehuda, okay? And Yehuda, of course, was a very mighty tribe. We know that Yehuda was the forerunner of Israel, really, okay? And Kalev was revealed, his greatness was revealed through his name. So Kalev is derived from the word lev, which means heart. So Kalev is like with heart. Now it's interesting. I got chas v'shalom. I'm not comparing him to a kelev, a dog, but a dog is also has a similarity of that. It is with heart. These are Kalev had this attribute of doing everything full-heartedly with his whole heart. There wasn't a false bone in his body. He didn't know how to deceive. He didn't know how to prevaricate. Okay, he did know how to be quiet, and we're going to talk about that. And the Midrash says that the reason he was connected. Excuse me, whoever's not muted, please mute yourself. So this idea is that Kalev, his heart was involved with praising Hashem. This is really the key to understanding him. He loved Hashem, he praised Hashem, and like Yehoshua, he had the special ability to trust in Moshe Rabbeinu, the total tzaddik, our greatest leader, the greatest prophet, okay? And he recognized that Moshe was greater than him. And Yehoshua did too. Now, it would seem obvious to us, yet what we have to understand is all the meraglim, all the spies were tzaddikim. And they get into trouble because they questioned whether Moshe was really as great as them. They knew they were on a very high level, and they couldn't conceive of a higher level. What does that tell us? What does this teach us about ourselves? So it teaches us, number one, that we have tzaddikim, and there's a hierarchy of tzaddikim as well. And number two, it teaches us that we can't know what we don't know. People are always amazed. People are always amazed when they go from one level of Torah to another, and until this becomes habitual. Okay, so the first few times this happens, they assimilate a Torah lesson. It changes them completely. It changes their outlook. It changes their perspective on Hashem and their understanding of Hashem. Their das is changed. Everything gets changed. And what happens? They say, wow, I didn't know what I didn't know. I couldn't even conceive of what I didn't know. And then it happens again and again. And after a while, you get used to this concept of there's another level, and I just don't know it yet because I don't even have the vessel to hold that das, that understanding and knowledge and awareness. Okay, so you will see that truly the greater a person is, the more humble they are, because they know they're so much greater than them. And you see that today, we're not going to speak about the tzaddikim in the desert. We'll get to that in a minute again. You see that somebody who is usually, okay, we don't like these terms like low level, they're politically incorrect, but spiritually or whatever, they're not on the greatest of levels. You can see they're usually very arrogant. They usually always want to have an argument. And it usually comes from a place of a lack of knowledge. Okay. And one of the ways to get to the next level is to bittul ourselves, to nullify enough of our ways of doing things, our opinions, and so on and so forth, our fight, to nullify that and say, I don't know, I'm open to more. I'm not open to project myself onto what I'm learning. I'm open just to receiving it. And that is where change and growth come from. So the spies, the Meraglim, okay, it says from what we understand from the Midrash, they were arrogant. They thought they were too greater than Moshe, and they should be allowed to go to the land. So I see I'm going to get behind if I don't hurry. So let me go to the next part. Okay. Oh, one more thing about Kalev, importantly, and this is important. And it's important to me because Kalev was davened by prayed by one of the most amazing places in the world. For me, it's just an unbelievable place, Maris HaMachpelah in Hebron, where Abraham, Yitzhak, Yaakov, and all the imahos except Rachel are buried. Okay. And by that holy gravesite, he went alone to pray. Okay. The other spies didn't want to go because they were afraid. Why? Because the Nephilim and the giants and Amalek and whatever lived in that area. They were afraid because they were afraid of the inhabitants of Canaan. Okay. I mentioned earlier that they knew they'd have to go to war. And they were afraid of the people that eventually the Jews would have to go to war with to take Canaan. Okay. And so they were afraid. Now, if you go to Hebron today, you go on an armed bus or an armed car and you get there. And then I've only taken the bus, and then the soldier escort you from the bus stop. And when the charming giants of today's times, so-called giants, act up, you can't get in, because they're threatening and they're terrorists and so on. So even today, there's a lot you have to overcome to get there. Okay. Of course, after a while, it becomes rote. But why? Because it's a spot loaded with Kedusha. As a matter of fact, the Midrash tells us in other places that Adam Harishon was buried there. Adam was buried there. The first man was buried there. We know the spot has a tremendous amount of power. So Kalev ignored the danger, and he decided that Yehoshua was protected more than him because he was Moshe's chosen one as the successor. And he had special prayers that Moshe said for him. And so he said he needed the the schus, the merit of praying by this particular place. So he went there. And the Midrash tells us that the Shekhinah entered with him the Shekhinah came along with Kalev, it's very beautiful, into the cave to inform the Avos, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, that it was time to take possession of the land. So we understand Kalev's greatness from this Midrash. The Shekhinah entered with him. Very beautiful. Okay. So Kalev, what did he daven there? He davened a few things. And one of the things he davened is that he asked to be saved from the spies. He didn't want to give in to the corruption that was about to happen. And he was saved in the end. And he bided his time throughout this journey. Okay. So we spoke about the spies. They all wanted to be heads. They couldn't accept that Moshe was greater than them. And part of that was revealed through how they journeyed back. Okay, so read the parsha, tremendous amount of Sfarim and books and everything. Read the parsha, you'll see what happened when they went to the land. And then they came back and they made their report. Before they came back, they wanted to bring something from the land to show everybody what it was like. So what did they bring back? They brought back a cluster of grapes, a pomegranate, and some figs, and a fig. And it says that they may have brought back other things, depending. So it took one person to carry a pomegranate, one person to carry a fig. That's how massive the fruits were. And it took 8 of the spies to carry the cluster of grapes. That's how massive the fruit was. So did the spies do this for a good reason? Well, depends how you look at it, depends what you learn. So did they come back to show them how good the land was, or did they bring those fruits back to show them that the inhabitants of the land were so massive, such giants, that this was their regular fruit? And it says that that's the reason they did it. So the spies came back and they gave their report. And in their report, they began with praising the land. They gathered Bnei Yisrael around and they said, it's a beautiful land. I actually want to read you some of what they said from the Midrash. They said that it's an extraordinarily fertile land. It is true. It flows with milk and honey. The honey, by the way, isn't honey like from bees. The honey is fruit honey that comes from the dates. Today, you can even buy them here. They're called honey dates, and they're like almost melt in your mouth, dripping with what really is like honey. They're not medjool, they're another type of date. So if you can look for them and see if you can find them. So they say the goats have so much milk that their surplus milk flows to the ground, and dates, the honey from the dates flows down, and the land is running with streams, literally, of milk and honey. And then they show the fruit and they say, isn't this beautiful? And then what do they say? They say the people who eat these fruits are monsters. They're giants. And the land cannot be conquered because the people who dwell in the land are too strong. And we are going to conquer. We're going to see that in the south of the land lives Amalek. And we know Amalek, everybody knows Amalek from previous parshas. We don't want to encounter Amalek. So the people started to get very, very afraid. Then they said, okay, you can see how they started off. First, they praised the land and they flattered it. And then they put their zingers in. They were manipulative. And they manipulated because they genuinely were afraid. Okay. So, and there's other reasons too. By the way, there's other commentary that says that they didn't want to go to the land because to them, they couldn't understand why they had to live in the land and farm and do material things when they had the man in the desert and they could learn Torah all day long. They felt it was a step down. They didn't understand that the actual physical mitzvahs of living in the land were necessary to their spiritual development. They couldn't just sit back, take them on, and learn Torah all day long. That's a whole other commentary. So they began to spread this report, and they said the inhabitants were huge, and it's a land that consumes. It's a land that consumes its inhabitants. Okay, and we were like grasshoppers. So the idea is who were they like grasshoppers? They were like grasshoppers in the eyes of inhabitants. They said, they gave a comparison. We were like little hoppy bugs, grasshoppers. But what really they're saying is in our own eyes, we were like grasshoppers. We were small compared to them. Their emunah wasn't strong enough to trust that they had Hashem with them, and that it didn't matter that they were outnumbered, that they were normal-sized human beings and not giants, and that, that they weren't very prepossessing. Maybe they didn't have the best weapons. They couldn't really believe that Hashem is really the one that's going to lead to victory. Now, anybody who knows what happened in Israel in just the 6-day war alone knows that we can't attribute these miracles to the greatness of anything but Hashem. None of what happened makes any sense. Read the history. It doesn't make sense. It's not because of the genius of the soldiers, of the warriors, of the leaders. No, it's because of Hashem. And all the incidents that had to occur, one after the other, going back to that hashgacha process we spoke about in the beginning of the talk today, all the incidents that had to occur, the minute supervision of every single incident. Okay, somehow these great tzaddikim couldn't connect with this. Okay. There's a really fascinating Midrash, I'll just briefly mention it. They said that the inhabitants of the land were so proof, and what did they use, so big, what did they use as proof? That they were sitting in what they thought was a cave, and all of a sudden one of the giant's little daughters came along and picked up their cave and threw it, because the cave they were in was really a pomegranate peel. Now, this has a lot of Kabbalistic meanings, but the idea is that they really wanted to put fear into the Jews. Everybody except Yehoshua and Caleb, okay? And there was an argument because of that. So Rebbe Nachman says a lot about this idea of, I guess we could call it the idea of the grasshoppers, how people see themselves, how we see ourselves compared to other people, and how we see ourselves compared to ourselves. And I really want to talk about this. It's so important. Just give me a minute. Somebody's not muted. Okay. So, I want to find this page. It's really very interesting. I've written about this before. I just find it very fascinating. So the Rebbe says, actually Reb Noson says, but it obviously comes from the Rebbe, that the Zohar says that the Meraglim, the spies, couldn't enter the Holy Land eventually, because remember, their generation had to die out that we mentioned before. Why? One reason, ultimately, it was because of their arrogance. But how does this tie in with this idea of, they said, well, we were small, we were like grasshoppers in the eyes of these giants, and in our own eyes, we were just little nothings compared to them. So this idea is so important. How is that tied to this idea of arrogance? How is seeing yourself as lowly tied to the idea of arrogance. So on the surface, we can say it's false humility. Okay. It's like there's a joke. I don't know, it was such a flattering joke, but it just popped into my head. Two Rebbes or two men are sitting next to each other, and one says, "I'm nothing," and the other one says, "Well, I'm a bigger nothing than you." Okay, people outcompete themselves on their humility, and Rebbe Nachman speaks about this a lot, about this kind of false humility. Okay, it's as damaging, maybe even more damaging than out and out arrogance and bluster. Okay, it's pretending to be humble while secretly thinking you're great. This is actually arrogance, and it's dangerous because why? Not because you're going to fool people or you're even going to fool yourself, but because you will never learn how great you truly are if you cling to these ideas of false humility. What do I mean by that? So each of us has a godly soul. And each of our souls is literally a chelek Elokim, a portion of Hashem above. If we don't understand how precious we are, how valuable and beloved we are by Hashem, and how much we are capable of, we will not be able to find the right balance between knowing when to be humble and knowing when to say, hey, in this I'm strong, because we're going to be involved with a focus on nonsense, on stuff that's not important. Okay. So one of the things, okay, is this battle for status and honor. And if you listen to the mini lesson for today, you can hear that I spoke about that from also from Likutei Halachos. But this idea of not really worrying about our personal greatness as much as being in touch with this idea that we have a holy soul and that our greatness is 100% from Hashem. Our greatness isn't about our talents, our status, our looks, our money, our ability to stand for long bouts of tefillah. Really, that's not really our greatness. Our greatness really is from Hashem. And because the spies had so much going on with this, right from the beginning, first they couldn't accept that they weren't tzaddikim like Moshe, and then they felt that they knew better than Hashem, and they were going to go check out the land. They didn't trust him. All their flaws, a flaw after flaw, a lack of emunah, a lack of betachin, a lack of emunah in tzaddikim, amunas chachamim, emunah in wise men who are greater than them, a lack of appreciation for who they really were, and a lack of appreciation for who the children of Israel really are. Not seeing that the people that they were manipulating and fooling and flattering and confusing, and then ultimately trying to scare and threaten, not seeing that this was truly the end of the generation. This caused the end of that generation. This prevented them from attaining that level we spoke about before, the level of Eretz Yisrael, the level of attainment of physically reaching the Holy Land and spiritually reaching the Holy Land. So the message for each of us, there's so many messages here. It's such a rich parsha in psychospiritual messages, but the message really is take a look at yourself, a positive, loving look at yourself, and connect with the idea that everything good, your nakuda tova, your good point, is totally from that umbilical cord-like connection with Hashem, and anything else good, the talents, the skills, whatever else you have that isn't good, it's because Hashem gave it to you. I'm sorry, I thought I turned my phone off. Gave it to you in order for you to use all those gifts to what? To reveal Hashem's greatness in this world. And everybody has different ways of doing that. Some people's way of doing that is to fill a house with children. God willing, it should be all of us, to have to raise up children to come close to Hashem and continue. Some people have other ways in addition to or instead of. For some people, that way may be to make beautiful paintings that inspire people to yearn for Hashem. Some people may, make beautiful cakes, which they serve at weddings to enhance the joy of the wedding. And obviously people have many, 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 many ways to use their talents in the service of Hashem. And what are we using our talents for? That's really the question. And it comes down to, how do we view ourselves? Because Rav Kivak did a beautiful little lesson last year sometime, a share on this. And he says we are spying out. Rav Kivak is a Breslov Mashpia, a very amazingly deep speaker. And he says we're spying out ourselves. We are looking at ourselves. What the spies teach us is how to look at ourselves. They thought they were spying out the land. But what is the land? The land's ourselves. And what they brought back, and again, we can learn so much from the Zohar and the Midrash and other commentaries, but what they brought back was a distorted view because of their inability to appreciate who they really were. They needed to have true humility and at the same time have holy self-esteem. Believe also in themselves. The only way to do that is to not look at the next person. The only way to do that is to look in the mirror. Because if you get into the compare and contrast, you're going to lose your view of yourself. You're going to be looking in a funhouse mirror. It's going to become distorted. You can only look at yourself. Who am I? How am I serving Hashem? Now that's going to include a lot of interaction with other people, because masses and masses of mitzvahs are involved with helping other people and seeing other people for who they really are. Okay. But knowing and believing that this message is something that you can reach. How can you reach it? If this sounds foreign to you, or if it sounds like a nice idea, but yeah, right, I'm not really going to carry through. This is really the essence. It's one of the, I would say, one of the essential points in Breslov teachings is to know yourself, value yourself for who you are, at the same time, be extremely, extremely, truly humble, genuinely humble. None of your greatness and none of your humility has any relationship to how other people see you. It has to be how you see yourself. Okay, unfortunately, we live in such a world where people are so hurt, walking around with so much heartache from how other people have viewed them or do view them, that they forget to look and see themselves and to see the positive that they have. So please, God, we should all see the true positive, what that positive entails. Okay. All right. I do want to get to Challah. Do we have a couple of more minutes? Yes. Okay. So anyway, long story short, the Jews they wanted to accept what the spies said, despite Kalev's and Yehoshua's contradiction, Kalev especially, and they wanted to believe this slander, this Lashon Hara about Eretz Yisrael, and that they couldn't conquer it, and they begged to go back to Mitzrayim. Can you imagine? They wanted to go back to Egypt to be slaves. Again, like, they're whining a lot. They're complaining a lot. Okay, we're not going to get to the Erev Rav bit of this time because we only have a couple of minutes left. But then we knew, I told you before about the generation having to die out until, and the Jews had to wander until they could go to the land later. And we get to that in Tanakh, in Nach. So then we have the mitzvahs that were discussed here, Challah and tzitzis, and also the offerings actually are discussed first. And I want to talk about the mitzvah of Khala. So the mitzvah of Khala, Okay, so I'm assuming that most of you know, maybe one or two of you, this is a new concept. Challah isn't the bread we eat at Shabbos, okay, the braided bread. Challah is the bread named for what challah is, okay? Challah is a portion of the dough that would be taken out and given to the kohanim, okay? It was a priestly offering, and every household would make a big batch of bread dough each week, and they had a lot of mouths to feed, and they would give a significant portion to their local Kohen. And this is how the Kohanim had challah, had their own bread. And the laws of separating challah, says the Rambam, technically really only apply in Eretz Yisrael. Okay. However, the Rambam says that the Chazal say, the sages said that the practice of separating challah we all do today, so we don't forget this mitzvah. Okay. So many people eat only bread that is pas Yisrael or pat Yisrael, which means it's baked by Yisrael, by a Jew. Why? Because challah, a portion of that dough is taken out, a blessing said over it, and because we don't have the priests today to give the dough to, we burn it. Okay, we burn that portion separately away from other foods. And because of that, okay, that dough is eaten by a Jew. Now, some people don't hold by this, although it's best to, okay, because it's good to take challah yourself, when you make your challah, to make enough of a batch of dough that you can remove the portion and learn the halachas of it. It's not complicated at all. But if you can't, at least try to buy bread or challah that's pas Yisrael. Okay, it's an easy thing to do. And this will help you keep in mind this idea of all the offerings, because challah is certainly one of the significant ones. And it's also a mitzvah that's very much tied into women. It's said to rectify Chava's mistake with the nachash and with the fruit of the tree. Now, I do want to tell you more about this. It says that when you separate challah from the dough, you can't say the entire dough is challah. Okay, you can't say this whole dough that I'm making is challah. Now, everybody has, depending on your community, a different amount of dough that's a minimum for challah. It might be, but I usually do 5 pounds. It could be 4 pounds. It depends. Some people make the mitzvah, they beautify the mitzvah by making it 6 pounds, whatever it is. So you can't say, oh, all of this is going to be challah and I'm going to burn it all. No, it must be a portion. So we have a beautiful teaching from Reb Noson. He says that when Adam Harishon, when Adam, the first man, ate from the tree of knowledge, he caused many sparks of holiness to be scattered throughout the world. Okay. Rebbe Nachman teaches the importance of eating with holiness. Okay. Learning what it means to eat with holiness, obviously kashrus, obviously saying blessings before and after your food, but also the details of the halachas that apply to preparation that maybe aren't exactly kashrus. So for example, challah. When we engage in the mitzvahs related to food, what happens? We are rectifying the sin in a way of Adam Harishon. We are certainly lifting up those sparks. We are bringing them back to their origins, those sparks of holiness. And okay, hold on. There's some more about this. I really wanted to show you. It's a beautiful lesson in and of itself. So Chava, so in order to correct, so I spoke about Adam Harishon, but in order to correct Chava, so why? So our sages say that Adam was called the Challah of the world. He was a complete offering himself. By the way, this is related to this idea of we can't make the entire dough challah. Okay. What does this mean? He was created completely pure. Adam Harishon, that we could go into details another time, maybe when we get to Bereshis. He was created absolutely pure. He was Hashem's firstborn, okay, so to speak. Okay. And he himself was an offering. When Chava led Adam to the sin, okay, yes, we know it was a Nachash, we know it was Chava, we know Adam chose also, but she was the bridge between that. What happened is people began to give in to physical desires and impurity. And Challah is such a great mitzvah that it rectifies those sparks I talked about, and it rectifies Chava's error that she made. She was seduced by the Nachash, by the serpent. It rectifies her error, and all of this is so important. It's so important, and it's our mitzvah. Women, we have such a big, huge role to play in the rectification of the so-called original sin of Adam. Okay, Adam Harishon. We have such a role to play by taking challah. And if there's a man in the house, a man can take challah too, by the way. Many men are bakers. Okay, but if there's a man in the house and a woman in the house, the woman should take the challah. If she can't take the challah, let's say she's recuperating in bed from the flu or whatever, and her husband says, I'm going to make the challah this week, he should still bring in that bowl of challah to her, the dough. He should bring it in and say, you take the challah with a blessing. Or as many of us do, we share that blessing with others. Somebody who, for whatever reason, is unable to take challah, okay, we can make the blessing and daven for them and pray for them. As a matter of fact, it's a time of prayer for all of us. The kneading of the dough is a time of prayer and a time of salvations, especially in the areas of shidduchim, finding your soulmate, in the areas of children, and in the areas of parnasa, in the areas of sustenance, obviously, because what is challah? It's bread. What is bread? Staff of life. Okay. We only skipped a little bit of what I had planned today, so I'm very glad for that. Are there any questions or comments about this amazing, amazing parsha Shelach or Shelach Lecha? You can type in. You could speak. Nope. Okay, great. So thank you for being here, and we'll post this on YouTube. I hope you come tomorrow to the Azamra class. This Sunday, we have planned a special class on anti-Semitism, and the plan is for 11 a.m. to 12 noon, and it's going to be the spiritual understanding and approach of anti-Semitism and what's going on right now and how to make sense of it from a spiritual perspective. And we are going to send out notifications for that probably this Sunday. If not, it'll be the next. And I hope you all have a great week. And I want to thank once again Dr. Eleanor Gaudas for sponsoring these lessons. Please Hashem, it should bring merit to her and her wonderful family. Okay. Bye, everyone.